Scott from Konig, and welcome to another episode of the Behind the Wheel podcast, the thing that we do on Wednesdays. Special guest with me this time. I've dragged him into this world, Joe Schaefer. Joe's the president of Konig, and in addition to that, has a lot of good information for today's conversation. So,
I do enjoy watching behind the scenes a lot more.
Yeah, well, I enjoy watching from behind the scenes more too. So, we had so many questions come in post SEMA, and a lot of them had to do with the show, what the show was like. Is it worth it for companies to go? Why were there so many companies missing? And we've started to answer a lot of these questions just as they come up, but they're not, there's some things that you lose by not being there. I wasn't there, and you did. You went out there and you walked the show, and probably for the first time in a long time, you walked the show as a non-exhibitor in the sense that you didn't have any obligations to be stuck in one area for the whole time.
That's right, and I'm still tired from it, and pleasantly surprised. It was a good experience. I'm glad that we did it.
Right. So now, let's start with some of the obvious stuff. This show this year compared to, we can't say last year because last year there was no show. It was a virtual show. The show before that, 2019, would have been the last show that we all attended. And we had been going for, I think, we were almost 39 years in a row?
Well, that was officially my 40th show. 81 was my first year, so 40 consecutive shows. 40
years. It's got to feel like such a blur going for 40 straight years because I know I've been I was 15 before we took the little hiatus there. And I feel like I'm starting to have trouble remembering exactly which SEMAs were which, but 40.
Yeah, 40 years, and without a doubt, it's a blur.
Yeah.
But there are things over the years that have stood out, and to see what I believe it'll be next year is really going to be special.
So, 2019, the show was jammed packed to the point where they had drawn so many booths. There were so many aisles. It was overwhelming the outside. We had tents that had now were exhibit halls on either side of South Hall. We had exhibits that had never been put there, utilizing not only the front of the Las Vegas Convention Center but also the back. They had things all over the place. It was the biggest show, and it was tough to move around. How did that compare when you were physically walking this show?
Well, this year was a combination of different things. First, SEMA has a brand new building they committed to long before the pandemic. So they had more square footage than they've ever had before.
I think it was 1.2 million square feet.
Additional square feet.
Yeah.
So I think regardless, we would have had more room. This year was truly an enjoyment to walk around. The aisles were wider. It gave you more room. When there was a vehicle you wanted to see, you could spend more time, get around the vehicle.
Right.
They had more areas for people to rest, to sit down, go through. If you want to have a quick meeting, you could do those things. That was nice. There's no doubt that there was a lot of displays that weren't there.
Right.
And I was a little concerned for people that went that, geez, maybe they won't come back next year because they didn't see everything they wanted to see.
Right.
I kind of believe that next year is going to be a spectacular show because they have the footage now.
Right. I
believe that a lot of the people will be back, and I'm pleased with the direction I think the show is going.
It's interesting. It's like when I spoke to a lot of exhibitors after the show that did attend an exhibit, some of the things that we appreciate, I think, as exhibitors is when they say like it was great, like we were able to go to the local cafe there that was close to the hall. We were able to get our lunch. We were able to sit down at a table. We were able to maneuver around. We had meetings. We had space in the aisles where it didn't feel overwhelming. Now, if you don't exhibit at the show to realize that, these are some major pain points for yourself when you're exhibiting, you don't appreciate these comments, but it is a big deal.
It's a very big deal. And I think that next year, if you get to go to the show as a buyer and walk the show, it's going to be better than it ever was. I saw this year they have more outdoor food courts. They have so many more things that make it more enjoyable to enjoy your experience.
Right.
It's one thing we would go there to do our business, what we had to get done. It's another thing to go there do your business, and also have a good time and enjoy it. If you're
Right.
a car nut, it's the place to be.
Yeah, and it is interesting because there was a lot of things that happened this year in comparison to, let's say, 2019, the last time they had a physical show. They we know that for numbers wise, they were 50% off on attendees, and they were 30% off on exhibitors. We know that to be fairly factual numbers from what I've
I would agree.
assumed. Now, what's interesting though is this was the first time ever, and it's a conversation that's been happening for, I mean, as long as I can remember, the idea of letting the public into the show on the last day of SEMA Friday.
Right. And that this year they did do that.
Right.
And there was a lot of pushback from a lot of manufacturers. But I think that all in all, it worked out from all the contacts that I have and relations I have in SEMA, that it worked pretty well and it went pretty smooth.
Yeah.
And I think that gives people good opportunities to be able to go there. If you're not you're not there as a buyer, but you want to get into the show, you're a car guy.
Right.
I mean, the one thing that was there this year again was some of the best cars and the nicest cars that you'll see anywhere at any show in the world.
Yeah.
And those cars were there again this year and will be there years to come. So I think it's an opportunity for people.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like if you've never been to SEMA, if you've never had the opportunity to go to SEMA, SEMA is an interesting thing because you can go from booth to booth and you're with big dollar, well-built, incredible built cars to the point where they almost just fall into the background. Like you start walking through booths and you don't stop. If you had seen these cars at any given car show, you might spend a few minutes walking around looking at the details. But for these, you start to lose that ability.
No doubt. There's so much to see. So many cars are just exceptional. You already turned me in for being so old. In 40 years, I've been going to the show.
Yeah.
And I still get an adrenaline rush walking around and looking at these cars and looking at the workmanship and looking at the money spent. And it's but you take some for granted because there's just so many of them.
Right. It's interesting to watch not only how SEMA has evolved, but what the new West Hall means. 1.2 million square feet additional. They had Teslas, from what I understand, going between the halls.
They have an underground tunnel from the new West Hall to the main halls.
Right.
With Teslas supplied, free rides, shuttle service.
Right.
Underneath the highway, underneath Paradise Road. Really good experience. It was really it was well run. It was organized and prepared correctly. It was a great deal.
When we look at those 30% numbers off on attendees. Yes, there's probably a lot of companies that and we should probably reiterate why we didn't display. And really, it wasn't a stance against or for the show. We would have been there in any capacity. We were still on this tail edge. We have some people here that, staff-wise, that maybe had some concerns or some health issues. It was logistically going to be a little bit difficult for us to staff the booth and carry out our show. And we made a decision based off of our employees first. And so there's no regret there for that reason. We are already committed that we're going back to the show next year. So that's that. But we can surmise that out of that 30% people that didn't attend, exhibit at the show, there was a lot of international people that couldn't, just because of quarantine rules or whatever it may be.
All our European customers were not able to be there. We knew that well in advance.
Right.
Asian customers as well
Right.
in advance. So we knew they wouldn't be there. And another reason we did it, again, was we are headquartered in New York.
Right.
Where the West Coast companies can just drive over.
Yeah. Right.
We don't have that luxury. So
Right.
it was a decision that we made, and we stood by it.
Right.
And we'll be back next year.
Yeah. And so we know about the international people. We think that by next year, I believe that a lot of them will return. There's going to be this continual shift of type of people displaying or whatever it may be, just by the nature of technology and in the way of doing business changing, right? But that's not different for SEMA. That's every trade show. I'm not talking about incredibly amounts deficient, but they're changing. Times are changing, and people's priorities change with it.
Without a doubt. We used to go to SEMA, and it was really about selling domestic customers.
Right.
But years ago, and I 40 years at SEMA, but 30 years Automechanica, and years ago, Automechanica was the place to be to meet the people worldwide and have those meetings. That has shifted in the last 10 years to SEMA.
Right.
So you'll go there with different intentions, with different business plans, but you'll still go.
Yeah.
And people will still be there, and the product will be there, and the vehicles will be there. But it has to evolve.
Right. I think that's, I've said to people before when we talk about SEMA that, in my opinion, and that's all it is, it's my opinion, that if you are an extremely established brand, if you have a lot of customer base, that the ROI of SEMA has obviously diminished as the years have went. But when we start to look at the fact that SEMA, there used to be a lot of the I'm not saying they're not there anymore, but Automechanica's, Tokyo Auto Salons, and with all these different international shows, everybody would go to all these shows, and it seems like a lot of those shows have been either really consolidated, they're much smaller than they are before, or you're starting to see people really, as an international show, favor SEMA as the one show that they're going to go to. So for some of those established companies, if you still have an international agenda, SEMA is a great meeting place for you to be at.
SEMA absolutely is. It has been chosen as the show.
Right.
Like I said, for years it was Automechanica.
Right.
And now it is SEMA. Shows like Auto Salon, they've become more local shows, and they just are not international in any way. But SEMA is the meeting place. I know myself, friends and customers and manufacturers that I've meet and plan to meet at SEMA every year.
Right.
And that wasn't possible this year again.
Yeah.
But I believe it'll be back next year, like you said, and a lot more so.
It's so interesting to think about what happened this year, the year that we've been talking about. We go back to this public day, right? Like I think there's two sides of this coin. I'll explain the two sides. The first side is the people and the exhibitors that said, hey, this is a trade show. This is not the week I want consumers or the retail public in the area. This is a trade show. I want to speak to my buyers. I want to be very focused on business-oriented type of clientele. Then there's us. And yeah, I think we're the outliers. So, yeah. But we've always felt that, hey, if you're going there and spending all that money, if you're going there and you're bringing your best product, your newest product, if you're going there and you're going to be putting on the type of display that SEMA calls for, what's some extra eyeballs?
Well, I've been a proponent of that from day one. I was on the SEMA councils and whatnot, and old school companies didn't want to hear about it.
Right.
I always felt every opportunity we get to talk to the public, find out what they're looking for, the more information we get, the better off we are, and the better job we can do. So yeah. I felt that for years, and I'm glad it's finally happening.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that what we've always kind of talked about in-house, and why I think we're so for it, is that we really do spend a great deal of time looking for the feedback from our consumer base, like not just from our our retailers, but from the general public themselves. And that's why we do lives on Wednesday before the podcast. That's why we do the podcast. That's why we answer every comment, DM, message, like everything we can get to, because we want to hear the opinions of what people have to say. And is it more work? Yes, but that's our job. Like, our job is to do that.
I think you do a better job when you can get the information of what people want and need, rather than developing something and trying to force it upon and market it that way. So that's always been our method. Our method is to find out what people are looking for.
Yeah. So, do you think that there's... So we've seen some pretty decent sized players this year not go to the show. Do you think that there is a percentage of some of these companies that have done, so they did business in 2020 pandemic? Obviously, we can make an argument that was a surreal a thing, but can now they've gone 2 years, some of these companies, without having exhibited. Can we make the argument that some of these companies may take a stand that I don't need SEMA to do my business, and some of these companies may not return?
I think certainly that's going to happen. And I think some of them, if they're not looking for the information, if they're the old school companies that want to just develop product and push it out there, it may not affect them one way or the other as much.
Right. Right.
But for us and for a company like us, I think being there is important.
Yeah. I do think that there's some possibility, and this is a conversation we haven't even really had well internally, but I do think there's a possibility that we may adjust our approach going forward to SEMA. Like, not, we'll go, but what I mean is, like, when we display, maybe we don't do exactly the same type of display we did before. Maybe it's not as big. Maybe it's a little bit more product focused. Maybe there's less cars. Maybe there's more cars. Not really sure, but maybe we're at that point where I feel like we may rethink exactly how we approach SEMA.
I would agree, and we've done some changes of that way already, but I see a lot more coming in the future, and especially if it's opening up to the public, we have to be more accommodating to that. Maybe have a few more tech guys there that can talk to people, those types of things.
Yeah.
Who knows where? But I do think we're going to have to continue to change, but I think for the good.
I think the public thing is such an interesting piece because I think that the part that maybe some of you don't know if you're on the exhibitor, mics are a little low. Sorry, we'll get closer. So I think the part on the exhibitor part is just that when you go to display and you let these consumers in, a lot of people don't know that on the show is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. By Thursday after lunch, there has traditionally always been a major drop-off in traffic. Now, I'm not saying that exists for every hall. There's a lot of square footage at SEMA, and the traffic flow of each hall is a little bit different depending on where people seem to start. But there is this thing that people, especially buyers, they come in Tuesday, Wednesday, they finish up what they have to do on Thursday, and they fly out. So Thursday, Friday always felt a little bit lighter for us. And by them letting the public in on those days, you're already set up, you're already doing your thing. It's not really a punishment as much as almost a reward, in my opinion.
Well, it's a return on your investment.
Right.
Again, you display your product, you have your best people there. Tell people about your product. Let everyone who wants to know about your product and see your product hear about it and see it firsthand. Touch it, ask questions, give us information, all the above.
Yeah.
And now with SEMA Ignited Friday evening,
it almost fits now.
Right. It just makes it worthwhile to go.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that SEMA is doing exceptionally well is that the people that are stuck in it's just a trade show. The other part of it is that, yes, it's just a trade show, but what says that trade shows aren't going to evolve as well? This may be the next step.
And it's not just a trade show.
Right.
It's so much more.
The whole city gets taken over.
I mean, when you see the cars driving down the strip, race cars and drag cars, and you name it, it's a lot more than a trade show already, and it's going to continue in that direction. Every
valet and every area at every hotel through the whole city always has cars parked outside. Some people do that as they look at it like almost like additional space to show cars. But,
without a doubt.
But yeah, you see these cars. I mean, when the city, SEMA brings its own traffic pattern to Las Vegas.
Just to be in the immediate area and smell the race fuel and smell the tires burning from the drifting and the donuts and all kinds of things going, just to be there. That if you're a car guy, it's more than a trade show.
Right. One of my favorite parts of SEMA used to be, I mean, it's different now because the SEMA Ignited thing and they do that SEMA Parade.
Right.
But it used to be the Friday night when you were starting to break down because we used to have to get the cars out of the booths. And you would see the most incredible, wild, non-street level race cars, high-end exotics, just driving on the street, and everybody turns their head at it because they're all going to transports and different things. I always thought that was such it was just like that wild free west thing you never saw.
And now it's officially a parade.
Right.
With every vehicle that's on display.
Right.
And to hear these things running and all the open headers and, again, the race fuels. And it's just, again, I think that SEMA tasted a little bit of blood on the positive side with the Friday experience. I think they're going to continue to grow that. I think they're going to continue to give people, just people that are not officially in the industry, an opportunity to make it a weekend that's a great weekend if you're a car guy. I think they tasted that blood, and they're going to continue with it.
Yeah, it's interesting to see their evolution as well. So, did you get over to the West Hall?
Of course I did.
What is it like for?
The building is just magnificent. Before you put anything in it, it's magnificent.
Right.
Everything is new. Everything is beautiful. You know, the food courts are there. The restaurants. The display areas are open. There's not a lot of columns. You know, it's an inside thing.
Yeah.
We have to move our cars in and out, but just outstanding. Just really, really, really first class.
I've heard a lot of raving about the bathrooms in the West Hall. That there wasn't a wait, and that there was plentiful and.
Well, you know, you've been going nearly 20 years
50,
now.
Yeah.
We lived there for a week.
Right.
Because there's a couple days before we open, and there's a day after we close.
Yeah.
So we lived there for a week. So we talk about things that maybe not so interesting.
I know, but it's like these are the things that, as an exhibitor, when you head out to these shows, these are the things that can make your week fairly pleasant, because you're working. It's not all pleasure. It's not this major fun thing that everybody. I mean, I have a good time. I'm just saying, but these are the things that can make your week pleasant or make your week feel longer.
Right. And for everyone that visits, their first experience.
Yeah.
The only thing that I saw as a shortcoming this year, again, was the 30% of the vendors that weren't there.
Right.
You know, if you went there to see a particular company and they weren't there, you might be disappointed.
Yep.
So I would just say that if you go next year, you look at the online and you can see who will be there. I could promise you there'll be more there than there were.
Yeah.
Will everyone be back? I can't promise you that.
Yeah, sure.
But I hope so.
It's interesting if you go online and you look at the floor plan, like a lot of halls, and we've had, you know, I've heard this on both sides of the coin. I've talked about both sides of the coin, which is that the floor plan, you know, in some halls felt like there was just a lot missing, right? They pulled the walls in, they pulled the show parameter, you know, circumference there in, but they also added 1.2 million square feet.
Yeah, it would have felt much more open even if everyone was there that was there in 2019.
Right.
It would have. Then couple that with 30% of the people down. But they widened the aisles up, which was just terrific. You know how it was.
Yeah, I do.
You couldn't walk up some aisles. It took you twice as long to get to where you wanted to be.
Right.
So, you know, like I said, all in all, and you know, we had internal discussions about how was it going to be. And I went with an open mind, but was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. No, that was the one thing. When Joe came back, I said, you know, I was expecting a slightly different answer. I was expecting, you know, I went to the show. Yeah, there was people there. There was a lot of people there, but, you know, it felt off or whatever it was. And your answer was no. It felt good. It was a good show.
It felt good.
Yeah, I think it's nice to know that there's so many people that even in one of these times that were ready to get back to being physically present at some of these shows.
And I think that was exactly the attitude. You know, we all know when shows go on, there's always going to be tense moments. There's things that don't show up that should show up, and how come I got to be here on the weekends and different things.
Right.
But for the most part, everyone I spoke to, and I spoke to a lot of vendors, you know, and other wheel companies that are competitors as well as friends, and everyone had a good attitude, and they were grateful to get back to business.
Right.
And it showed. You know, it showed in everyone's attitude and the way everyone acted. Getting in and out of the another thing was because of the additional building, getting in and out of the halls was much simpler than it used to be.
Oh yeah.
You know, not the lines for security and whatnot.
So this year they had mask mandates. That was new. I arguably think, again, I'm not for or against masks. I'm just talking facts. I don't take political views on this one. But I personally think that whether you travel by air, whether you go to these large shows, if you go to concerts, it unfortunately is looking like masks are going to be here to stay. I don't really see them going away. I mean, I'm not telling you I love wearing them, but for some, this was a contention point.
Yeah. Well, but it wasn't a SEMA. It wasn't SEMA taking a side. It was a state mandate.
Absolutely.
They had no option other than to carry it out.
Right.
And I will say that they were actually a little lax on the enforcement once in the halls.
Yeah, I saw some pictures and stuff.
That they might have been a little lax on it, but they clearly had no option.
Right. it's hard because like when you think as SEMA, like yeah, you can hire security to go around, you can hire staff to go around, you can hire let's say off-duty police officers to go around to try to tell people, hey, you got to put your mask on. But I mean, you still have hundreds of thousands of people. And even if the mask is on 2 seconds after you pass them, for them to, so it's not something that you can easily police.
They had dogs there,
right?
Sniffing dogs there, which
COVID sniffing dogs.
Well, I didn't ask them. They didn't have much to say, those dogs. But yeah, getting off track. But they got everybody in and out easy. They did ask you the reason I was starting to say about when you entered. They did check that you had your mask when you went in the building.
Right, makes sense.
On the entrance.
Sure.
They had to check there, but once people were in, they were pretty lax. But people were respectful. Again, and there was enough room that you can move around, and there was a lot of people there.
Yeah. So. It's interesting because, like even now, like as I'm preparing to get back in the air a little bit, like things have changed. It's very reminiscent to me of what it felt like to kind of get on an airplane or whatever the first time after 9/11. Not as dramatic, but when something changed, all of a sudden you couldn't bring, like it was like when you bring the water through, you started to drink the water. I'm like, I was out of my water before I even got to the gate, but then it was no liquids, and there's this continual evolution, and unfortunately, I think this may be part of the course.
Yeah, and we adjust.
Right.
We do what we have to do to get done what we have to get done, and hopefully, for SEMAs to come in many years, we're all getting on the planes, and whether or not we have to wear a mask and earmuffs, I don't know. But
full winter gear setup.
Yeah. Whatever it is, we'll adjust and we'll go, and I think that the show's going to live. So.
Right. So, do you think that there's anything that you saw on the ground that would have made the show better? Was there things that were completely new there that maybe were a little off base?
I think they did a pretty good job of using up the space.
Right.
And again, it's going to sound like all I want to do is eat when I'm there, but
right.
The fact that they had indoor and outdoor numerous food vendors and different types of places to sit outdoors as well as indoors.
Yeah.
You could sit outside and look at the show cars because they had the feature vehicles all outside, and just a lot more friendly, a lot easier.
Do you think that will remain when a lot more people come back? Do you think like they have, with the additional the square feet and maybe some of the things they've picked up from the feedback from the show this year, do you think that will retain?
Well, I think that I think the things like the wider aisles and whatnot that they did, I think they'll retain those.
Right.
Of course, more people, more vendors, and more people, it's going to get more crowded.
Right.
The only negative I heard on the show was registration for some people. There was a struggle there.
Okay.
I heard that from a couple sources.
I feel like we've kind of randomly always heard that though, haven't we?
Yeah, we're usually pre-registered, but I don't know how many of the people on Friday.
It's tough. Like, you hear us. I mean, like Joe joked about the food thing, but like, here's the thing: when you're working a booth, or even if you're not, you walk this whole show, and then you want to get something to eat, and you got to stand in a line for 40 minutes to try to get a slice of pizza. That's aggravating, especially when the pizza costs you like $15. So the fact that they're putting these vendors out there so that you don't have to now spend your time wasted.
Yeah, and what we talked about, the West Building, they have a food court,
right,
with no less than a half a dozen types of food, all different stations, and they actually had a bar for anybody who wants to get a cold beer while they're there.
Sounds really
we can't when we're working, but,
right. But don't get me wrong, at 5 o'clock we're done.
But they have a bar there and everything. So that new building is just really a pleasure.
Yeah. When you were off the strip, hotel-wise, travel-wise, moving around-wise, did it feel as congested, or did you feel the difference there?
Oh, traffic is definitely lighter in Vegas. There's no question.
Yeah.
The strip, which at peak times, cars literally couldn't move up in 19.
Yeah, of course.
Traffic is moving. It's still busy, but traffic is moving.
Right.
There's no question about that. I didn't go to a lot of the other hotels.
Makes sense.
But there's no question Vegas as a whole was lighter.
Right. Probably helps that they also don't have enough rental cars. So.
But they have the Teslas now. You can get on a Tesla, move around.
That works.
Yeah.
Pretty soon there'll be Pretty soon there'll be Rivians and Lucids and everything all over the place.
Battle of the electric cars.
Yeah, it's coming. So I think that's pretty much it. I mean, is there anything else you think?
No. Again, I just leave off that I think it was better than anticipated.
Right.
At least in my eyes.
Right.
I went there open-minded, but I went there thinking I had to be realistic.
Yeah.
And report back realistically. Mm-hmm. And was really pleased to come back and say, Scott, we got to make sure that we're there again next year. We could have easily been one of the companies that said, you know, something, we haven't been there in 2 years. We don't have to go back. No, I feel there is a need. Right.
I mean, I will say publicly that was never our intention. We made the decision not to go this year for very different reasons. This wasn't a look how much money we could save thing. This was like there was a lot of things coming up against us feeling like it was a good decision for our staff. Like that was really where we were at.
And that's where when I got back, that's where our meeting ended up. That we said, okay, we don't regret not being there this year. We made the right choice for the right reasons.
Yeah. Right.
But we're looking forward to going back, and unless it's the same situation next year, we'll be there.
Right. And we will. So that's it. I try to bring you guys this information that we talk about, that we get a lot of questions of, that we hear people in the industry talking about, so that you can have different sides of the coin in a factual way. So that's all we were doing. We're just talking about SEMA, and now that we've done that, we can move on. And we are.
Everybody have a great Thanksgiving, because you won't hear from me next week.
This guy.
Because I'll be in the background again.
Yeah, right. So that's it. We're gonna do this again next Wednesday when I believe, I don't know if they've announced it yet, but Tavares will be on our podcast next Wednesday live. So you can come in and ask Tavares questions. Should be pretty good. Freddie's a good guy, and he's got a lot going on. So don't bring the hate with you, but everything else, you bring that. So that's it. Make sure you stay tuned for Friday. We're dropping another piece of content. Hopefully you'll be toward the morning time this time. And we'll be back here next Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Take care.